I don't think a technical education hurt Mozart when he was writing music. I don't think any of the best violin players or piano players in the world today, that their creativity was stymied by a fundamental education. In fine art, that's being peddled on a daily basis. The idea that if you're too technical, meaning that you actually know what you're doing with the moving parts, that somehow you can't be creative also, that one strips the other away. And I would make the argument that if you don't have a language with which to speak, a technical, fundamental understanding, what are you saying? What's in your head gets stuck in your head. You're not able to get it out into the world because you don't have a language with which to say it. Think about art as a language. What would you be able to say? Let's equate a piece of finished art to poetry. What could you possibly say poetically if you couldn't speak a language properly? If you had a poor vocabulary, or even go back to fundamentals even broad, more basic than that. What if your alphabet was missing 6 or 7 letters? What could you possibly have to say as a poet in a language that you didn't even have the alphabet? The alphabet is a constant, and that's what I'm talking about. Your fundamentals in art, they're a must. There's no flexibility on that. And the hardest part is finding somebody who knows what they are, who knows how to explain them. We run into this problem, and it's kind of twofold. We have all these great artists, but they're so far down the road in their understanding that they don't even remember what the fundamentals are. They think the fundamentals are things that are really advanced for someone who doesn't know anything. And so if they're teaching that as fundamental, yeah, it's going to seem impossible to learn and to grow. Where's the alphabet? Like that's always the question to me. Like in art, where's the alphabet in somebody's teaching? In the training that you're getting, is there an alphabet? Is there vocabulary? Is there grammar? Like those are the things. Is there anything that looks like that in the education? And if the answer is no, then it is highly likely that you are not getting an education. You're just hanging out watching a show.
I've heard people say that technical art training can limit creativity. What are your thoughts on that?
If you've ever heard a kid play drums, you would know better, or violin for that matter, right? If you're not trained in how the thing, again, take a violin. I mean, that sounds like animals being slaughtered if you don't know what you're doing with it, right? And the truth is, to a skilled, knowledgeable artist, when you see somebody painting that thinks they know what they're doing but isn't educated, it's just as bad. It's just as bad. You can see all the flaws, the remedial level of understanding, or the absolute absence of understanding in some things. And that little bit of knowledge would make a huge difference in the person's work. But again, without fundamentals, there's nothing. It's, again, like I always compare art as a visual language to written word, verbal language, right? So imagine if you want to learn a language. You want to create poetry, which is what art is. In all of its forms, art is a visual poetry. You don't get to jump in to poetry on day one. You have to learn the alphabet of the language you want to speak. I mean, it doesn't get any more fundamental than that. But if you think you're going to create poetry in a language and you don't know the alphabet, you're in for a rude awakening, right? And you think about, like in the English language, we have 26 letters in the alphabet. Imagine if you were skilled in using only 23 of them or 20 of them. Say there are 6 letters missing from your alphabet. So every word that would require one of those letters, you can't use it. It would become very difficult to express specifically what you mean, right? You could generally get a point across, but you couldn't be specific with just 6 of the 26 letters missing. Now, what if we took away the vowels, critical ones? 5 letters taken out of the English alphabet cripples the language entirely. No words can be made, right? And so which piece of information can you forego in the fundamentals in your visual language education? And the answer is none of them. Now, fortunately, there aren't 26 fundamentals in a visual education. There are only 3. The alphabet is, and again, so we're dealing in 26 letters, the basic fundamental, and in art, there's just 3. There's value, color, and edge. But in language, once you have that, then you start making words. They start small, they get bigger, right? And that's, it's another layer of learning. And art has the same thing. You start in very simple ideas, flesh out some basic things, and then build up. But in a written language, on the way to poetry, you start with an alphabet, and you have to get it down, all of it, not 25 letters, all 26 must be functional within your mind. You then start with a very small vocabulary, and the words get bigger and bigger, 1-syllable words to 2 to 3, and so on. You then have to learn, like spelling obviously comes with that, but then you have to learn vocabulary so you know what they mean. And you use them over and over and over to develop experience with it. And your teacher stands over you and tells you, no, that's not spelled right, the meaning of that word is not what you think it is, right? They correct you along the way, which is the guided experience. And eventually you've got grammar. You learn how to compose your thoughts, and eventually you add your own flair and turn it into poetry. Learning how to make art, visual communication like that is really no different. And if you think you can shortcut those processes, you wind up in a place where you're never really visually stating truly what you intend. You're always getting just a shadow of the intent, unless you get lucky. But luck doesn't strike every time you work. And so if you're sitting down and you're working, you get a good piece here, and then you get 3 or 4 bad pieces. Where I get a lot of people who are like that. They're happy with something they do, but they throw 10 away for every one they keep. If you were writing things in a language that you are skilled in, you wouldn't throw away 10 things for every one that you keep. You would be able to keep everything you write, basically. And it should be the same in art if you have that fundamental education. If you've ever seen how a large ship, like a battleship or a cruise ship, is built, they're built in a dry dock, and they have this frame, this rigid frame that holds them in place while they're just metal beams. The whole frame is put together. The ship is eventually sealed so that it's waterproof. They build in all the insides, and once it's built and it's able to float in the water, then they can roll it off into the water. But you can't build it in the water. It needs the structure, that very strict, sturdy structure to hold it in place while it's being built, and it's incapable of floating. Once it's sealed up and it's seaworthy, it can be put out into the water. And once it hits the water, it can go anywhere in the world. It's not limited to staying in the water that it was dropped into. If it's seaworthy, there's not a place in the world where there's water it can't go. And that's what an art education is. Very strict, controlled while your skills are being built. But once those skills are developed, there are no limits. Anything you can imagine can be created and brought to life with the same control that you would be able to render something right in front of you. Again, once the skills are developed. And I can tell you, I was a science fiction and fantasy illustrator for 10 years, dragons and spaceships and explosions, and I mean, you name it, I painted it from here. I did build some models along the way, but a lot of the things that I worked on came completely out of my imagination with no reference material at all. And all it is that I had a sense of how things worked. And so I was able to use that information to bring things to life for book covers.